All right, so I'm going to make a bunch of smaller videos covering each of these topics. This particular topic is going to be grouping. It's page 105 to 108, and I thought that would be kind of an easier, gentler way to sort of basically end the chapter. All right, so we're going to do groupings. I'll do one on joins. I'll probably do one on unions, and then one on DML. All right, so here we go. Let's share the screen. So this guy here is Apex, and it's Application Express, and we're going to be going into the SQL workshop. Okay, I kind of, since the last video, shut down, done all sorts of things, and now I'm come back to it. I'm going to spend probably a reasonable amount of time in clients for now. So I'm going to go and remind you guys a little bit about what client, the actual structure of client is. So client here, come on, give me some sugar here. There's client, and this is more useful for those that don't necessarily have the book or are coming back to it later. But you can kind of see client number, client name, street, city, blah, 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 blah. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to leave here, and I'm just going to do is straight select asterisks from client. All right, so right there, yeah, I don't want to do any of that. All right, must have clicked on that. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to go select, and remember, SQL is not case sensitive, but I like to try and keep the reserved words in uppercase. So select asterisks from client. Remember, each clause on its own name. We have a select clause and a from clause. I'm going to go, run, and off it goes, and there's all of our stuff. Now, where I'm going to try and take you guys with the grouping thing is I'm trying to get you guys thinking more in the terms of sort of like data analysis to some degree, because that's where grouping really takes its stride. And you know, up until now with the various selects that we've done, a lot of that could be done really through some spreadsheet technology. But when it comes to grouping and joining and even unions, which is pretty well the rest of this chapter, this stuff really transcends what you can do in a spreadsheet. That's why I'm kind of slowing down and breaking it up. So in this case, what if I want to know how many clients I actually have? How many clients do I actually have? Well, you know, as I sort of scroll down, I can tell that I've apparently got more than 10. That's because the way this interface goes is by default, it only shows you 10 rows. Now, if you want, you can obviously just bump that one up a little bit. Be careful, though, when you bump it up. I mean, seriously, be careful, because you could end up running a query that could take a long time. Not so much with this data, but with other data. So anyway, I'm just going to scroll down. Apparently, I have 12 clients. That's how many clients I have. Well, that's great, but there's a cooler way to do that. Now, let me show you quickly one type of function, because I haven't really talked too much about functions yet. I'm going to take the client name. Actually, what should I do here? I'll do client name and city. Actually, I'll just do city. So I'm going to go to city, and I'm going to run it. I'm going to go boom. And so what this is basically saying is that we've got 12 cities. Now, we already know that we don't have 12 distinct cities. I'm hoping I talked about this before, but there is something out there called distinct, which would basically let me see how many distinct cities I had. Apparently, I only have 6, but that's not what I want to talk about. I've got basically 12 cities, including duplicates, loaded into the data. Now, there is a function out there called upper, which converts a string to uppercase. Notice that upper does it every single row. Every single row is converted to uppercase. So because of that, this is called a single row function, right? Upper is a single row function. Now, if I want to know actually how many cities are in the data set here, I could go and use an aggregate function or a multi-row function, and that is called count. Count. So count the number of cities. Notice that what it does is it goes through all the rows and spits back one result. One result. So it's a multi-row function. It aggregates the set. Aggregates the set to basically produce one row. Now, another thing to think about here. This is counting the number of cities, but I can actually say, well, can you please count the number of rows? And right there, that's counting the number of rows. Now, we're getting actually some interesting information here, just so you know. If I basically put these two together, count the number of cities, what you're going to see is that I can tell at this point that every row has got a city in it. See that? There's 12 rows and there's 12 cities. So that's kind of cool. That's not super exciting, but that is a little piece of data analysis. Everybody's in a city. Let's go back to Asterix now and see what else we can do in our data set. So counting is one of the most common things you do with aggregate functions. You almost always want to know how many rows are in a table, almost always, right? By the way, be careful when you're walking around all proud with this piece of information, because if a table has got, let's say, 1,000,000 rows, you could say, well, that's a really big table. But if the 1,000,000 rows has only got 3 columns in it, that's not necessarily bigger than a table with, like, let's say, 250,000 rows with massively wide columns. So there's much cooler ways you can use to work out actually how much memory this thing is consuming. And I don't know if I'll ever get to it in this course, but you know, that's why we have Google. But anyway, I want to see what are the balances on these guys' accounts. So this is how much money I guess they basically owe us. So what are the balances on these accounts? So right away I can go, hey, here's the balance. I can go. Awesome. Now this doesn't tell me how much balance. If this was an Excel, I'd probably dump that out to an Excel spreadsheet and then put a sum function at the bottom. But instead, what I can do in here is I can go, give me the sum. Give me the sum of the balance. This will now add everything up. All right, so that adds everything up. That's awesome. I can also, by the way, there's other aggregate functions out there. So we've done count, we've done sum. I should point out sum only works in numerical data. I hope that makes sense to you. Count works on all data types, but sum is only going to work in numerical data. There's one out there called average balance. There's one out there called min. Min will work on all data types because remember, all data types have, even characters have a numerical value behind them. Max balance. And by the way, let's get some spaces and getting a little bit gross. That's gross right there. Boom. So we're getting some pretty cool stuff. By the way, if I don't like this as much because its average is kind of decimal beyond reason, I can use a single row function here, and I can go round that. So round is another function. Pretty well every relational database has got one of those things. Round it to the second decimal place. Sorry, space. Let's get that. And that'll be a lot cooler. Now this projection clause is starting to look a little unruly, so I'd be tempted at this point to start putting things on their own line. And there we have it. Okay, so decent data analysis. There's other ones out there. I think there's standard deviation, there's variance, there's median, there's mean even. Well, mean's average. So definitely go to documentation and stuff like that. This is sort of more of an intro course, so I don't want to sit there and go through all these aggregates, but you kind of get the idea. Notice for all 12 rows, actually we don't have 12 on here anymore, but for all the 12 rows, we've done some significant data analysis here. You could even work out the range, by the way, which would be, you know, 8,000 subtract 5,000. You know what? Let's do that. Why not? So I'm going to go max balance subtract the min balance, and I'm going to run that, and now we got ourselves a nice little range. Now the thing is that's interesting. Why? Oh, that's because it's only 500. That was 5,000. Okay. Anyway, so there's that. Now we don't like that showing up in our result set. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an alias, and I remind you guys, or we'll tell you guys that it's as is optional, but you should put it in there and as, and I'm going to go range. I think range is a reserved word, so it might give me a bit of grief, but it let me get away with it. Good. All right. I know for sure range is a reserved word, but not in this context. So we're good to go. All right. Great. So that's grouping everything into one set. Now, that's awesome, but we can go a little bit further. I'm not going to run it again, but remember there was a column out there called cities. And let me, cities, let me, by the way, do this. One good thing you might remember here, if you can right click, create a new tab, and then have this thing sitting on the browser and have the browser sitting on the table you're working on, you can probably get, you know, kind of refer back, because sometimes it's hard to figure out what are the column names that you're looking at. Now in QBE, which was the subject earlier we did, that was query by example, we were using applications to generate the SQL. And there's all sorts of graphical user interface prompts that were helping us out. Here you'll notice there's nothing. There's nothing. If I spelled balance with 2 L's, or actually more likely if I'd gone balances, which would have been a reasonable thing to do, it's just going to give me an error and I'm not going to get any help at all. This is actually reasonably helpful. It's saying that when it says invalid identifier, every column here would be considered an identifier. So balance, yeah, anyway, I could go more into that, but the error makes sense, but probably not to you, and you're just going to be too tired anyway. If it's 2 in the morning and you're trying to figure this out, it's not going to work. So what I strongly encourage you to do is have the object browser open, especially as we get to some of the more complicated ideas. Another option, of course, would be to print off the ERD, which I can't remember if I generated one for this or not, but I will be. So, and actually think about it, maybe you should know what an ERD is by now, but anyway, entity relationship diagram. All right, anyway, I think an interesting piece of information would be, what are the balances by city? Because you'll notice there were a few, we had 12 cities, but we only had like 6 unique cities. So we obviously have some duplicates here. So what if we wanted to sum these things up by city? Maybe we have a sales rep or something like that who's responsible for each city. So we're going to go in here, and you think what I want is I want to have city on the left-hand side and all these things on the right-hand side. So I'm going to go city. We're going to go comma, put that thing on its own line. I'm going to go run. Now immediately it blows up, and it blows up for a really interesting reason. It says city is not a single group function, which you would have said an aggregate group function, but either way, this is group, 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 this is group. That is not a group function. So what I wish it would say, but they've never done this in all the relational databases I've worked on, they've never done this. And when I was learning this by myself, this would be like a deal breaker. I'd be sort of staring at the screen in a pre-Google world trying to figure out what the hell happened. I wish they'd say, what you're missing is a group by clause. Group by the non-aggregate. So group by city. So remember, we're not grouping by balance because balance is inside of a group function. We're not grouping by balance because it's inside of a group, and so on and so on and so on. But city, there's no group there. If I put a count in front of that, there'd be no problem. If I put a min in front of that, there'd be no problem. Of course, I wouldn't get the answer I wanted, but at least the SQL would work. But basically, as soon as you get a non-aggregate up here, you've got to group by it. So when I go run, now I've got some meaningful data. Now it's only slightly meaningful, but I'm going to actually add, I'm going to add one more column to this. I'm going to add the idea of count, because I want to know how many clients are in each city. And I'm basically going to say as, I'm going to line it up because I'm cool, as num clients. Don't know why I changed the case there because it won't matter, but anyway. Oh, from's not found where expected. Remember what's going on here? I went select, it's expecting either a literal or identifier, and it gets one. Then it's expecting either a alias or a comma or the from. Gets the comma, great, moves on. Down here, it's now expecting an identifier. I'm pretty well going to claim that that's an identifier. Then it's expecting a comma, an alias, or a from. It gets an alias. Now it's expecting a comma or the from. It doesn't get the from, so it freaks out. Boom. That'll fix that problem. All right, so we go, and now I can say Easton's got 3 cities. In total, that's how much they owe. This is the average. Oh, that round, by the way, geez Louise, let's fix that up. If this was a class, I'm sure by now someone would have piped up on that one. But anyway, av balance. Good enough. All right, so by the way, you could argue do the same aliases as these guys, but that one was just gross. Anyway, so City, number of clients, the sum, the average, the min, the max, and the range. And that's actually pretty cool. There's one more thing I want to do with this. And I'm waffling because there's something cool that's not in the book, but I would be tempted to share it with you so that you're slightly cooler. Okay, I'm going to share it now, and then I'm going to pull it out. Okay, so I'm going to go and show you this guy, roll up. If all you're doing is producing reports, this is absolutely fascinating. Watch what it does. Roll up will give me a total line at the bottom. Isn't that cool? So that's our total line at the bottom. It rolls all this up, rolls up all the cities into one row. That's how you can translate that. It rolls up all the cities into one row. And the only weirdness here is that now we've got a null in the city column because you know what? There is no city because we've rolled everything up for the city. So roll up is ANSI standard. The next thing I'm going to show you is not ANSI standard, but there's always some way to deal with it. What if you want the null, which Apex is showing us as a dash, but sometimes it ends up looking like the word NULL, or sometimes it's just blank. But what if you want the null to look like total? You can actually use something called null value. This is only in Oracle, but there's always something out there in all these relational databases. Null value is total. You can stick in a literal string. And at this point, for God's sakes, use an alias. And then I can go. And now what I've got is I've got the city and total. Pretty cool, just saying. Now, one other thing I would add to this is, what if I only want cities that whose sum, well, I guess I'm looking for cities that say they've got a huge amount out there because I want to basically make sure I got a sales rep on them. So I'm going to define huge amount as over 6,000. So what if I want a city that's got more than $6,000 in their balance? Now, this is a quick departure here, but I'm going to go where the sum of balance is greater or equal to 6,000. So I want to know at least 6,000. This will error out. And the reason it'll error out is quite fascinating, and it's worthy for me to pause the video, look up a quick diagram that I've got, and come back and bring you the diagram. So I'll be right back once I get the whole pausing thing worked out. There you go. I'll be right back. Okay, so as you can see, an entire hour has basically passed, or more or less, since I actually paused it, because I am getting to know my new friend, PowerPoint. What are you, 365 or something like that? Yeah, PowerPoint 365, which is just different enough from PowerPoint that it is driving me crazy. But you won't be the first class that's going to hear me complain about this one. Anyway, what I wanted to do here is I wanted to sort of explain a little bit the last query that should be fresh in your minds, but is a little stale in mine. Basically, it's select count the balances, or sum of the balances by city. And we got basically from client, group by city. And I'd made the comment that what if you wanted to make sure that cities with larger balances, which you decided is $6,000 and up, you want to basically identify those for maybe some special considerations. All right, so a common thing to do, and remember, I'm trying to spare you the pain of myself from the mid-90s, is a common thing to do is to think, well, I should just go where the sum of the balance is greater than or equal to 6,000. So basically, show me the cities where the sum of the balance is greater than 6,000. This in English makes perfect sense. But if you look at the way that this thing actually runs, let me do this, by the way, that I can maximize. Looking at the way this thing runs, will kind of tell you why that doesn't work. And so let me sort of explain a little bit about my notation here. So the cylinder is the universal symbol, if you want, for a database. All right. Now, whether you know it or not, the database we're actually on is called Marvel, because at the time that Apex came out, we were a big we were somehow involved with the Marvel movies. And so that's the tie-in there. I can later on show you the sequel to that, but anyway, the database's name is Marvel. We are in a schema called HTC 2020. Schema is just basically a user account, and then in there we have the table called client. Now, I've told you guys before that the SQL doesn't run from top to bottom or even left to right. It's taken and parsed into an actual program. So here, the first thing that happens is the from clause. And so what we get from here is it identifies the from, and it identifies all the columns that we're actually interested in. So we're really interested in city and balance. If there were other columns in the where clause that were not being projected, or in the group by clause for that matter, or anything like that, those would be in there too. So don't believe that these are just the columns that are being projected. It's all the information it basically needs to move forward. That's pulled into the cloud memory, sort of. The cloud is really going to be a collection of different memory pools. So I've decided, just for simplicity, to say cloud memory, even though I know that there's a bunch of different areas being used here. But basically, all that stuff is pulled into memory. Now, then what you would think would happen is it starts restricting and saying where the sum of balance is greater than 6,000. But the thing is, it doesn't know what the sum of balance is because it hasn't done the aggregation yet. All it knows is balance and it knows city. So because of that, this doesn't work. One quick thing, by the way, about these symbols, particularly this one and the results, I'm using a classic flowchart symbol methodology here. A lot of times, this typically means decision, and a lot of times, in all honesty, they would have something like a funnel that would be here. I couldn't find a funnel in the PowerPoint template, and I just did not have the sanity to create one for you. So I'm going back to classic 1960s symbol methodology here. But anyway, that means the decision, and that means display. So what I'm trying to say here is that the from pulls the information. It can't do the where, so it won't do the display, and that's why we get the error message. So as we go into the next thing, this is how it really would work if we had a having clause. So this is new now. I haven't talked about the having clause yet, but having is something that could take the restriction, take the aggregation and restrict on it. It's like a second restriction, the having clause. So we got the select, the sum, the from, the group by city, and now instead of saying where, we're going having. All right. So here, if we look at how this flows through the system, the client table is pulled in. Only the columns that we're interested in is now in memory. There is really no restriction, so everything funnels through. And then this symbol actually means correlate, but it's the closest I could come to for group. So anyway, so you can imagine that's a group by. So now it groups, and notice we now have groups. We now have groups in city, and we now know what the sum of the balance is per city. So now we can actually say where the sum of balance is greater than 6,000, we get our particular groups that make it, and out they go to the results. Now, that was cool. I thought what I'd do is take it one extra step and basically say, hey, what about all the other clauses? So here's our where clause, and here's an order by. Those are the ones that are added. So basically what I've done here is I said, show me the count of the city, count how many people are in the city, the sum of the balance from client, where the city's not Easton. I just picked it because it was easy to spell. Group by roll up. The roll up, you can ignore the roll up for now, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't do anything to the example. Having an order by. Okay, so I'm sorting by the, thank you PowerPoint for that. Anyway, I'm sorting by the sum of the balance in descending. So the stuff gets shoved in. Only the rows that make it past this restriction make it to the group by. The group by then groups them. The grouping, the groups are then sorted, and this actually means sort in that ancient symbol set, and then those are displayed. And so that's basically now how aggregation works, and that's about as far as I'm going to take it for you guys. The next thing I'll probably be doing is I'll be talking about joins. All right, good deal. That was a lot of fun. See you later.